You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcast on the modernisation of EU consumer protection rules.
The EU has some of the strongest rules on consumer protection in the world, but recent cases like the Dieselgate scandal have shown that in practice it can be difficult to enforce them.
So in April 2018, the European Commission proposed a new deal for consumers to ensure that all European consumers fully benefit from their rights. Want to know what's in it for you? Stay with us.
A fitness check of EU consumer and marketing law and an evaluation of the Consumers' Rights Directive in May 2017 revealed that while EU consumers benefit from one of the highest levels of protection in the world, some things could be improved, and an update to better adjust to the digital economy was pressing.
In 2016, 1 in 5 consumers had a problem and wanted to file a complaint, though in the end, a third of them decided not to do so, mainly because they thought the amount they could claim was too insignificant, or because they thought it would take too much time.
But although the amounts may be small when taken individually, they can be quite significant when taken collectively.
You bet. As a recent study of 6 markets, including mobile phone services, clothing, electricity supplies and loans, demonstrates, the estimated detriment to consumers in the EU 28 ranges between 20 and 58 billion euros in 1 year. So that's quite a sum.
It certainly is. So how is the Commission planning to better enforce consumer rights?
With a new deal for consumers. Want to know what's in it for you? We'll tell you in a minute.
The Commission proposed 2 directives, one on modernisation of EU consumer protection rules and the second on protection of the collective interest of consumers, which is a subject of its own. The modernisation proposal focuses on various consumer issues such as harmonising penalties for infringements, increasing transparency on online marketplaces, extending protection for consumers of free digital services and dual quality of products.
The proposal would amend 4 of the 7 main horizontal directives that make up the core of EU consumer law: the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, the Consumer Rights Directive, the Unfair Contract Terms Directive, and the Price Indication Directive.
Now, all this looks very technical, but the idea is pretty simple. The aim is to empower consumers to introduce a complaint when they find a problem and to strengthen sanctioning powers for member states' consumer authorities.
It also aims at extending consumers' protection when they're online and to clarify that dual quality practices misleading consumers are prohibited under EU law.
So what will change in essence?
Well, first of all, consumer rights online will be substantially strengthened. Under the new rules, when buying from an online marketplace, consumers will have to be clearly informed about whether they are buying products or services from a trader or from a private person, so they know whether they are protected by consumer rights if something goes wrong.
Let me give you an example. Imagine you buy a guitar on an online marketplace, but it arrives with a damaged string. What you didn't know is that you did not buy from a company but from another person, which means you don't have the consumer rights you would benefit from when buying from a professional seller. In particular, you do not have a legal guarantee if the goods are faulty or the right to change your mind within 14 days.
Under the new deal for consumers, this probably wouldn't happen to you, as online marketplaces will have to state clearly whether you buy from a professional or a private person and whether you are protected under consumer law or not.
Consumer rights would also apply to free digital services for which consumers provide their personal data but do not pay with money, such as social media platforms and email accounts.
And should you still encounter a problem or be treated unfairly, you would have more tools to enforce your rights and get compensation than you do now.
The new deal will ensure that consumers in all member states have the right to claim individual remedies when they're affected by unfair commercial practices, such as aggressive or misleading marketing.
And now we come to the issue of penalties. Aware that one of the reasons for non-compliance with the consumer directives is that current penalties are not sufficient to deter infringements, the Commission wants to strengthen the power of national consumer authorities to impose effective, proportionate and dissuasive penalties.
And for widespread infringements that affect consumers in several member states, traders may face fines up to 4% of their annual turnover in each member state, but countries are free to introduce even higher fines.
The Commission is also determined to abolish the unlawful practice of misleading marketing of lower quality products in different member states, such as coffee brands selling coffees with less caffeine and more sugar in some countries, while marketing them as if they're the same.
The new rules will not only benefit consumers but businesses too, notably by removing unnecessary burdens such as the obligation on companies as regards the consumer's right of withdrawal.
So consumers will no longer be allowed to return products that they have already used instead of merely trying them out, and traders will no longer have to reimburse them before receiving the returned goods.
So now that we know what our new rights would be, let's see how this has been received by stakeholders. We'll be right back with you.
Well, you can imagine who's cheering and who's complaining. While consumer organisations have welcomed the proposal, especially the stronger penalties for infringing companies, business representatives don't think any new legislation is necessary, as EU consumers already enjoy one of the highest protection levels in the world.
Traditionally in favour of any measures that would strengthen consumer protection, the European Parliament has insisted on the need to empower consumers to complain when there is reason to, and to increase the power of national authorities to wave the stick in cases of infringements.
MEPs also asked the Commission to provide guidance for online marketplaces on their obligations concerning consumer protection, and they've expressed support for having the same rules for paid and free digital services.
It's clear that both consumers and businesses may stand to gain from the updated rules, but we'll have to follow the negotiations to see how much from the original proposal remains at the end of the process.
You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcasts.